I never thought I'd face death, survival, and the legend of the mountains, all in one Christmas. But when you grow up in the hollers of Appalachia, you learn early on that the wilderness has teeth, and it knows your name. Welcome back to The Practical Woodsman. I'm Rutt, the creator and host of The Practical Woodsman. That's right. It's my super-duper genius that's brought this all into existence. Scientists and philosophers everywhere studying my noggin, try to figure out how it works and harness its powers. The story I've just introduced you to took place the year that I turned 15 years old. Before we get into the meat and taters of the rest of this tale, we've got to do the musical introduction to get us all in the mood. Winkety winkety. So don't go nowhere. I'll be right here when it ends. That's right.
Put a camp up right here.
The mountains were my home, my heart, and my classroom. I was born in a rickety old cabin halfway up the ridge, a house that creaked when the wind whispered and rattled when it howled. Do you know what the difference is between something that creaks and a crick? A crick is a moving body of water along the same lines as like a brook or a stream. That's a crick. A creak is something your bed does when you're getting all frisky with your woman. Life wasn't easy up there in them mountains, but we were tough folk. Down the road, each direction, I had several relatives and cousins, uncles, aunts. My Uncle Clarence and my Aunt Ruby were a couple of my favorite relatives growing up. I'd spend all sorts of time hanging around at their place. Uncle Clarence run his moonshine still down near Devil's Creek. Catch that? Not creek. That's what your bed does when you're fooling around with your second cousin. Creek is a moving body of water. And at Devil's Creek, my Uncle Clarence run his moonshine still. And I remember that area of the woods was a place where the trees all leaned in like they was keeping secrets. He had the hands of a blacksmith and the sly old grin of a man who'd outrun the law a time or two. In fact, he told me a story where he's running from the county sheriff, and he come around this bend, real tight curve on a road we all took, but he come around it so fast, way beyond the speed that he should take a curve like that. He'd go around that curve so fast that his rear bumper come into contact with metal roadside guardrail there and was throwing sparks all over creation in the middle of the dark while he run out trying to outrun the law. Then there was Aunt Ruby. Lordy, Aunt Ruby could fight. Nobody messed with Aunt Ruby. She was tough as iron, and she was mean as an old timber rattlesnake. She had a reputation that echoed all back in those backwoods. Nobody in those backwoods bars ever got the idea in their head, ever tried to mess with Aunt Ruby. She was mean as a snake. Folks gave her a wide berth, and for good reason. I remember seeing with my own eyes one of her brothers, one of my other uncles, push her off a four-wheeler and go driving up, taking that four-wheeler up the hill. And she chased him barefoot, chased him down on that four-wheeler, jumped up on that four-wheeler, beat him to a pulp, and threw him off like an old dirty rag and took over that four-wheeler. That's my Aunt Ruby. I wasn't so rough and tumble as a lot of my kin, but I admired that part of their personality and character. I still admire it. I was the quiet one. That's more my natural personality type. I spent my days roaming the woods, fishing in icy streams and creeks, and listening to the stories the old folks told about the old ways, and also about the creatures lurking around out there in the Appalachian woods. Most folk don't understand us mountain people, how we can live in a place where you might just disappear into the mist. But I loved it. The woods, the hollers, the seasons, the way that the woods and the mountains would change with each season, and I was particularly fond of wintertime in them old mountains. That snow that turned everything all quiet and still. On this Christmas I'm telling you about, I wanted to do something special. I told Uncle Clarence and Aunt Ruby that I was going to head out into the wilderness for a couple nights. I had in mind Christmas Eve, that night, staying out there Christmas night, and coming back sometime after that. Just myself and my good old dog, Lee. Lee was a good old boy, good old mountain dog. Part hound, part Heinz 57, a good, loyal old boy. Smarter than some of the people folk I knew. I remember my Uncle Clarence telling me, "You are plumb crazy," he said. He was chewing on the stem of his old corncob pipe. And he told me they were calling for some serious weather that night. Over that, I don't remember if it was a weekend or during the week, but he said over the next few days there's going to be some real weather up in these mountains. And he wanted to know, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if you get out there and things start to get overwhelming? And my Aunt Ruby was telling me how I was going to freeze my backside off. But she was telling me this. At the same time, she kind of had a glimmer of approval to the way she was looking at me and the tone of her voice. So I packed a rucksack with some basic things, a couple wool blankets, some biscuits, beef jerk, things like that, some matches. Uncle Clarence handed me a tin flask, and he said, "Don't ask what's in it. It'll warm you when you need it the most." Remember, I was only 15, but we had a whole different way of doing things back in them times. Times were different. The whole world was different. By late afternoon that day, Christmas Eve, the sky had turned to a heavy gray as Lee and I headed off yonder into the trees back behind Ruby's house. The snow had begun to fall, soft and lazy at first. I knew these mountains well. I knew every deer trail. I knew every gnarled tree. I knew every hill and holler. Every rock jutted out of the earth like a crooked tooth. And I had plans to camp up by this old hollow oak tree about halfway up a couple ridges back behind Ruby's house. From there, I could get up on that ridge, I could look out, I could see all the forest spread out there behind me. See all of it covered in white like a quilt. Well, I got out there, and as the night fell, the snow picked up. It fell in these great swirling gusts. And I heard something interesting a couple days ago on the news. They said, we ain't never had no real blizzard. Well, I disagree with that. The weatherman saying that looked like he was could be my grandchild. And I don't know how much to trust him or how he's defining a blizzard. But I remember several blizzards. Again, he says they weren't blizzards. Well, I'd like him to put on his boots and go out there with me some night when he says it's not a blizzard, and see if he don't go changing his mind. And that's what we had on this night. Me and Lee out there, middle of the Appalachian Mountains, out in the middle of the backcountry. Snow coming down, swirling, howling. The wind was howling for a long time there. It calmed down for a little bit, then picked back up. And so there's this hollow oak tree that I knowed about. And when there were some moments of calm, I cleared off the ground there, started getting my fire going. I got a nice fire going that night. And my intention was, because the tree was hollowed out, it was lying on its side. And I reckoned I could get right up into that tree. I wouldn't even have to pitch a tent or anything. I could sleep right up in the hollow of that big old oak tree. And where I put my fire, I could have the heat of that fire just warming me up inside that hollow oak tree. Boy, it was a beautiful night, and had the fire all flickering around on the snow coming down, flickering on the inside of that empty oak tree. Old Lee and I bundled up in there watching the fire. Thick, warm hound fur. I don't know what he was mixed with, but whatever it was, when winter would come around, his coat, his fur coat, would all get real thick. Then in the springtime and the summer, it'd start all falling out again. He'd go back to looking like a regular old hound. And wintertime, that fur coat would get all nice and thick. And there he was with me inside that hollow tree. He and I as cozy as could be, peas in a pod. I get out, fix the fire, those sorts of things, and it was quiet. I don't know if you've ever been out in the backcountry in a snowstorm, but it gets so quiet out there that you can literally hear snowflakes landing out in the forest. Think about that. You're in a city or something like that, you'll never hear a snowflake hit the ground. But you're out in the middle of the woods, you sure can. You sure can. I'm not making that up. You can hear a snowflake hit the ground. Of course, you don't have all the noise pollution that you'd have in the city. And all the wildlife, for the most part, is all hiding out. They're all trying to stay out of the snow, hide from the storm. But another thing I've read is that snow affects acoustics. Affects acoustics in a special way that makes it possible for you to hear a snowflake hit the ground. So there we are, fire, me getting up every once in a while, going around, getting firewood, putting that on the fire, keeping the fire going nice and steady. We were there for some hours, just the two of us. Silence of the forest all around, hear nothing but snow, like I just described. But something changed. Lee heard something, his ears pricked up, his head snapped over, looking behind the fire, off into the darkness of those deep, thick old woods. And he started to growl real low, staring off in that black darkness. I didn't think too much of it. That time of year, especially during a snowstorm like that, the bear are all hibernating already. Just ain't too many things to worry about. I didn't pay it no mind at first, but he kept on growling, deep down in his throat growling. Wouldn't take his eyes off whatever he could see, off toward the dark edge of the firelight, where the woods pressed in like a wall. I said, "What is it, Lee?" And he didn't take his eyes off whatever he was looking at. But I asked him again, "What do you see out there?" And I started looking off into that black darkness beyond the fire myself. The night was thick black, the kind of blackness that only comes up in them deep old mountains where the Even on a clear night, trees swallow up the moon. So I kept staring off into that dark there. Lee kept staring off into that dark, growling deep in his throat like that. And the more I thought about it, the more I expected to see some kind of raccoon or deer or something. That is something that's happened to me. Been out by the wood pile. Every night it was my job. Go out behind my dad's shed where we kept our wood pile. And I had to get enough firewood and stack it up on the back stoop, get us through the night and the next day. And on a really snowy night, kind of like this one, I'd gone back one time to do my chore and collect all that firewood. I got back here and I felt something watching me. You ever get that feeling like something's watching you? You read about it in stories and stuff like that, but has it ever happened to you? It happened to me. Got that eerie feeling something's watching me. Had my hands full of firewood, reaching for another piece of firewood, and I just stopped. Had that strong feeling I'm being watched by something close too. And I slowly straightened up and looked just slightly to my right. And there was the biggest old buck I ever did see, just standing there in the quiet woods. I could have spit and hit him. That's how close he was to me. And he was just standing there like a statue, watching me. And there was something in my subconscious or unconscious that knew that he was there. That did happen to me. So that was kind of on my mind. Maybe it's a deer out there that old Lee's growling at. But the longer I looked, the more the black seemed to shift and thicken, almost like the shadows themselves were alive. And then I saw them. Two faint glimmers, like eye shine when you catch a fox in the beam of a lantern. What I realized was that what I'm looking at there is reflecting the light of my campfire back at me. Two little lit up eyes in the dark. And they weren't low to the ground. This weren't no fox. You say, well, maybe it was a deer. Well, it weren't no deer either. They weren't moving. They were staring straight ahead, still as could be, waiting and watching. My chest got all tight, the fire popped, and Lee growled again, deep and guttural. One hand, without taking my eyes off those eyes, I reached over. Beside me, I grabbed a little hatchet I had, a little kind of like tomahawk hatchet hybrid. I grabbed a hold of that tomahawk, gripped it real tight, and I just sat real still. Lee and I both in the holler of that tree, looking out into the dark at those two eyes reflecting our campfire right back at us in the snow. Of course, I had a conversation in my head, something like, this is just your imagination. Too many stories, too many winters spent listening to the old folk talk about things they swore they'd seen but couldn't prove. But I tell you what, something was there. Something was there. The wind gusted through the trees, making the branches groan. That's another thing you hear real clear when you're out on a snowstorm out in the middle of the mountains, out in the middle of the woods. Everything's super quiet. Because everything's so super quiet, you hear these things that you'd never pay attention to before, like the way that trees, when they're swaying, softly swaying, they creak, they groan. With that wind come a smell. It was an earthy, sour smell, something damp and rotten. It hit the back of my throat and made me want to gag. My mind was, again, scrambling for answers. I'd already ruled out the possibility of bear, but my brain went back to it. Eyes weren't close together like a deer. I'd ruled out a deer, but my brain kept going back to the possibility that it's a deer. But none of these explanations I come up with in my racing brain sat just right with me. Like I say, the eyes weren't the scattered glow of a deer's eyes. They were set far apart and real high up. I squeezed that hatchet tighter. Every minute that passed, squeezing that hatchet tighter. Fingers shaking as the fire's light flickered and cracked. Finally, I worked up the nerve to say something. "Get back," I said. More to myself, I think, than anything out there. I couldn't really muster up my voice to throw it very loud. When I said that, that's when Lee let off a bark. He lurched forward a little, but he stayed right where he was at, but he barked, and that's when whatever I was looking at moved. Not much, just a shift, a step, a change in the way the shadows gathered, but it was enough to turn my blood to ice. I didn't see it, not clearly, just the suggestion of something massive, the curve of a shoulder, the faintest glimpse of something shaggy and dark. I tell you what, it was enough to make my stomach drop. Could it really be the booger everybody been talking about? That's what we call Bigfoot. My granny and my aunts and uncles, they'd warn us when we go out into the woods, you watch out for the booger. The old folks always said he wandered those parts. Something between a man and a beast. A creature that the old Appalachian forest claimed for itself. He'll watch you, they'd say. Follow you, just to see what you're all about. Some claimed to have heard him scream. A sound that could split your soul in two. I've heard it many times. Others said they'd seen him, but when they tried to tell it, you'd see the fear in their eyes. Their voices would shake when they'd try telling you about their experiences, and their eyes would dart away, almost like they were ashamed to tell you because they knew you weren't going to believe it, or like the memory was too much. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. "Go on," I yelled. "Get!" I shook that tomahawk in the air, just to make sure it could be seen, that whatever that was knew I wasn't just sitting there with nothing to protect myself or my dog. And you know, for a long moment, nothing happened. The woods were silent except for the wind hissing through those branches and the crackling of the fire, squeaking of the trees. Did I say the trees, they really squeak? It almost sounds like somebody talking, if you didn't know better. But it's just the sound that the trees make rubbing up against each other and that sort of thing when they move. And then you know what happened. A noise split the air, low and strange, like the rumble of an engine heard through a wall. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan. 'Twas something else. Lee really went crazy now. Frantic. I put my hand on him. His fur was standing on end. His shoulders and his back stiff as a board. And you know, I felt like grabbing him by the collar and dragging him off and both of us taking off running, but I was frozen there, staring into the dark where that shape had been, where I knew I had seen it move. And then it was gone. The shadows of that wintry blizzard night swallowed it whole. Then again, maybe it'd never been there to begin with. My breath came fast and shallow, each exhale curling into the air like smoke. I sat there straining my ears for any sound, footsteps, branches snapping. Like I say, on a wintry night like that in the woods, sound carries different. But I only heard the wind and my own heartbeat. It was thudding inside my chest like it was trying to escape. And that's when I did grab my dog by the collar. I said, "Come on, Lee." And I kicked Snow into the fire to smother it. And when I did that, boy, those woods got dark. Darkness just covered us instantly when I did that. At the same time, because of all the snow that was now on the ground, you'd be amazed how far you can see off. You don't need a flashlight. Even on a cloudy, snowy night like that in the middle woods, once your eyes adapt, you start to be able to see that snow is reflecting any light whatsoever. It lights the forest up. Now, not like daylight or anything like that, but enough to see. You won't go running into any trees or anything like that. I thought of Uncle Clarence, that old parting gift that he'd given me. That tin flask. I got that thing out, uncorked it, and one swallow burned all the way down, sharp and strong. And I used the sting of that moonshine to snap myself back to my senses. And Lee was eager to get on the move, and I didn't argue. I slung my pack over my shoulder. I kept that hatchet in my hand. And we tried to turn back the way I'd come. Snow whipping all through the air. Feeling it gets very hard to discern a trail or a path that you've taken, or even things that would otherwise be completely recognizable to you under normal conditions. Once everything gets covered in snow, things become unrecognizable. And we kind of got turned around. I didn't care. I wanted to get out of them woods. And as I trudged through that blizzard, that question kept echoing through my head. Was that really a booger that we just seen up there? Or was it just a trick of the light of the fire, my fear, my imagination spinning shadows into monsters? But you know, I was not scared of the woods. I've never been scared of the woods. I've never gone in there with any fear of being alone or in the dark or nothing like that. And my brain hadn't been thinking about things like that before I saw that. The reflection of those eyes, way up higher than they should be, farther apart than they should be, staring at me through the dark out across our fire. Well, I kind of reckoned I'd never know for sure. But the woods are old, you know, older than memory. And I know better even today than to think that I've seen all that they have to show me. Some things belong to the mountains, and it's best not to question them too hard. By the time I found shelter, my body was trimmed. I was cold. I built another fire, this one small and stubborn. Wasn't sure where I was. Wasn't even sure I was moving in the right direction. But I huddled close with my good old dog Lee. My hands still shaking, even after I warmed up. And when I closed my eyes, I saw those faint eye-shine glimmers, steady and unblinking. Real or not. I knew they were going to be with me forever. A reminder of what lives in those deep, quiet places of the world. And sometimes, it's better not to look too close. Well, that old blizzard grew worse. The wind roared through the hollers like a freight train, and the snow come down so thick I could barely see. My boots sank deep with every step. They're coming up to my knees, the snow now. My legs burning with every move. That takes a lot of energy, folks. Smallest task out in the snowy backcountry like that. Takes a lot more energy than you'd think. Just heard a story this week, or last week. Young feller who had a big following on the internet, going out in the woods and camping and stuff. Fancied himself a real outdoorsman. They found him froze to death. Snowstorms coming in. His grandma or somebody was trying to warn him about it. He didn't pay him no mind. He figured, what's the big deal? I'll just set up a tent. Or, I've got the skills to handle this. How bad can it be? Well, that's a big mistake, ain't it? Two things. Underestimating Mother Nature. Overestimating your knowledge and skills. You got to ease into those things like that. Never a good idea when you're just getting started on stuff like this. Go out in the mountains, depending only on yourself. I'll tell you why. Because your energy and attention can be dedicated to only so many things at one time. And sometimes Mother Nature will throw so many things at you to overwhelm you. Not optional things. Like getting warm, getting rested, getting out of the elements, getting a fire going. These sorts of things. Not optional. And what if all of your attention is spent just on trying to get your shelter in place, but you ain't got time to rest? You ain't got time to get a fire going. You ain't got time to take breaks, get out of the elements and things like that. I learned that the hard way, not on this story I'm telling you, but on another occasion. Sometimes it's modesty. It's recognizing that we as people have real limits. And what that means is that if you don't have somebody, an extra spare set of hands, somebody there who can help carry the load, you get in a lot of trouble. And that's what happened to this young boy. He died. I'd wanted to put good distance between me and that booger. The thought that he might be following along with us, following us along to our new location, put the hairs up on the back of my neck, boys and girls, I'll tell you that. But here we were. We set up another shelter, got our new fire going, but my brain was thinking about that an awful lot. We had stumbled up on this rock overhang I'd never seen before. Now, I told you at the beginning of the story, I knew them mountains like the back of my hand. When I come up on this rock overhang, I knew I'd wandered off course, because it was a feature of the woods I'd never seen before. But it was enough to get up under and get that fire going. And I reckoned I'd worry about getting at, figuring out exactly which direction to point myself in the next day. But it was important to try to get a good night's sleep that night. So that rock overhang kept the snow off of us. I got that new fire going. Lee curled up against me. Even when I got nice and cozy and warm, I couldn't really sleep because every crack of every branch, every creak of those trees, the squeaking of those trees moving in the wind, made me think of those glowing eyes in the dark. Morning come, but the storm didn't let up. My body was aching. I was hungry. I fed on some of that jerk that I brought along with me and some of the other things. But, if you don't understand how many calories you burn in conditions like that. We've been walking for a while, and I was starting to think I'm going to have to spend another night out there, which I didn't mind too much. But, I was kind of eager at that point to get out. I wanted to have some time to think about what I'd seen and experienced and run it by the old folks. And that's when I heard it. Through the woods, faint shout. Wind carried it right along. I stopped and listened real hard again. I heard it again. Rudd. Hey, Rudd. It was Aunt Ruby's voice. I couldn't believe it. I followed the sound pushing through the snow until I saw her and Uncle Clarence coming through the trees. Aunt Ruby had a scarf tied around her face. Uncle Clarence right behind her, carrying his old shotgun. Aunt Ruby said, "Look who we found." Grabbed me by the arm. "You lucky," she said, "you ain't frozen solid." Uncle Clarence had a spare coat with him he handed to me. He said, "Did you see it?" He looking at me in the face when he handed me that jacket. "Did you see it?" I said, "Did I see what?" He said, "You look like you've seen a booger." Well, I just nodded at him. I was too tired to speak. I didn't want to have that conversation. There in them woods, I wanted to get back to the cabin. And at that point, I had no idea what prompted him to ask me such a thing, except maybe his own life experience. Look on my face. I thought about how old Uncle Clarence growed up in them same old woods. Later, of course, he and I talked all about it. Got to talk about it all plenty. I got to tell him the whole tale, and he got to share some of his own experiences with me, but that's going to have to be a story for another time. Back at the cabin, they bundled me up by the fire, laid down at my feet. Uncle Clarence handed me a mug of something hot, and I remember Aunt Ruby kept muttering about damn fool boys and stubborn dogs. Day after Christmas come clear skies. The sun turned the snow to glitter. And there were them mountains off there in the background, standing tall and still like they always had. And I thought about how I'd survived my encounter with the booger, the storm, and the wilderness, the dear old wilderness. The thing I'm most in love with even to this day, the old backcountry, those Appalachian mountains I love so much. But it was that year, my 15th year, that I realized that the mountains weren't just my home. They're a teacher. They taught me how to survive, how to listen, how to face the unknown with some courage, but also with some common sense. About the time I was thinking that, Uncle Clarence come over and handed me a tin cup with a wink. He said, "I told you that flask would come in handy, didn't I?" And we laughed, and I said, you knew what you're talking about. And I overheard Aunt Ruby off in the kitchen out there talking to herself. "Foolish as a daggum mule," I could hear her saying. And I assumed she was talking about me. Might have been talking about my Uncle Clarence too. That was a cozy end to that adventure. Aunt Ruby's cabin creaking there as the warmth of the hearth seeped into my bones. And Lee, my good old dog, been gone a long time, snoring softly there at my feet. I looked out Ruby's frosted windows at the endless ridges where them hollers run dark and deep, and I thought about what I'd seen, or at least what I thought I'd seen. Maybe that old booger was real, maybe it wasn't. Maybe the mountains just have a way of showing you yourself, testing how much fight and faith you got in yourself. All I knew for certain was that I'd face the wilderness, face my fear, and come out the other side stronger. And been a lot of times after that I followed up on that adventure and had more. But it was in that moment I understood what Uncle Clarence always says. The mountains don't give you nothing for free. But what they take, they pay back in lessons.